Hello, I recently purchased an ancient, long-abandoned house, and of course, I cleaned it extensively. In the process, I discovered an ancient diary that said Lazarus serum experiments, which I later learned belonged to the home's former owner. The information is incredibly intriguing, but I just can't accept that it actually happened, even though it would help to explain the house's oddities. Anyway, the first 3 entries' contents are as follows. March 25, 1986. I shall now record my experiments in this book because I will soon be beginning my first effort. My first example is a bird that appeared to be in good exterior condition, but apparently passed away from a disease. Since I am well aware of the risks, I dare not utilize a broader subject as the foundation of my initial investigation. The subject's room also has a double lockable metal door and is a windowless underground chamber. If everything works out, the material I've developed ought to be able to revive the subject. It will finally be time tomorrow. March 26, 1986. As I awaited the dawn, the night went by agonizingly slowly. Only the odd drip from the faucet in the corner broke the stifling silence in my basement lab. I felt an uncomfortable shiver creep into my bones as a result of the room's icy air. I had the impression that the metal door in back of me was keeping the dark out. I had kept the dead bird in a box, and it was now lying on the room's central table made of rusted metal. Its dead eyes glared at me as if they were hiding a dark secret. I restrained the subject with shaky hands, strapping leather shackles around its wings and legs. The dim light above me created unsettling shadows around the space, and I could faintly hear the hum of electricity that eventually became a foreboding whisper in my ears. I took the syringe with the serum slowly, almost robotically. Its contents glistened in an unnaturally light green. As I inserted the needle and administered the first serum drop to the dead bird's body, my heart began to accelerate. As I cautiously pumped the liquid into its veins, I felt my breath catch. Uncontrollably twitching, the subject abruptly stirred, and its beak let forth a weak, agonizing caw. My spine tingled when I noticed the eyes moving as if they were gradually coming to life. I left the room to stop the reanimated thing from leaving and spent the rest of the day staring at the camera feed because I couldn't see any more movement from the subject. It appears that the serum was only effective for a very brief period of time, but tomorrow I shall check this with my own eyes. March 27, 1986. I'm currently caught in a panic and bewilderment due to what happened yesterday. The bird was still on the table when I went back to the basement this morning. It was still as though it had never woken up, and its eyes were once more lifeless and unresponsive. It appeared as though nothing had happened the day before. I took a quick look at the security camera capturing the space. The bird was shown in the video clearly returning to life yesterday, but it was now back to being dead. I approached the topic with a gnawing sense of uncertainty. There was no response whatsoever, and I even checked for a heartbeat. I carefully unhooked its wings and legs, disposed of the failure, and threw it into the fire. A cool draft and a faint fluttering were heard when I leaned forward to look at the creature more attentively. I sprang back in surprise as the bird rose with a single croaking cry. It touched down on the cellar floor and started spinning erratically, its wings flailing in a sinister rhythm. But it felt different this time. Instead of being a dynamic movement, it was a hideous distortion of life and death that appeared to be caught in between the two states. I couldn't take my eyes off the bird and froze in fear. As its cries became more frantic, it appeared to become lost in the space. This was a hideous perversion of life that never should have existed. It wasn't a revival. I bolted the metal door behind me as I hastily exited the cellar in a state of panic. The subject was still within, enmeshed in this strange dance. Sincerely, I'm not sure how to respond to this development. What is certain is that I must investigate this more. It should eventually starve to death on its own, according to theory. In any case, I'll give my dear buddy N.A. It's me once more. I decided to upload the diary's subsequent pages here as well. I've read the following entries in their entirety. The night of March 28, 1986, was uneasy and racked with dreams following the bizarre episode involving the bird. I often dreamed of the spinning bird, which caused me to frequently wake up sweating and terrified. The basement's gloom seemed to chew at my inner being. I called Dr. Smith last night. Despite the fact that I had not yet disclosed my ongoing covered studies to him, he is a seasoned researcher and a close friend I can trust. Dr. Smith agreed to visit today, and all I said to him over the phone was that I desperately needed his assistance with a puzzling case. I reviewed the security footage prior to his arrival and determined from the still dancing bird that it offered little of an escape risk. His attitude changed when he saw the bird on the floor, still caught in its strange dance, when he arrived and opened the metal door to the basement. As he got closer and gave the bird a closer look, he said, "What the hell is this?" I told him everything, starting with my research and ending with the time the bird started dancing. Dr. Smith thoughtfully rubbed his chin as he watched the security footage. We made the decision to imprison the person in the basement while we continue our inquiry. The following few days should show whether its condition changed or whether it presented a threat. Dr. Smith tried to hide his dread, but I could see it in his eyes. We had produced something that was beyond our wildest dreams, and we had no idea how to handle it. We were at a precarious stage in our investigation and would stop at nothing to learn the facts about this horrifying beast. April 3, 1986. We spent hours performing experiments on the unusual bird, which remained in an unsettling condition of suspension, and the preceding few days went by without incident, apart from my deteriorating nightmares. Our research aimed to illuminate the mystery behind this enigmatic phenomena. The subject was first exposed to several environmental factors in an effort to gauge its response. We adjusted the lighting, played sounds, and varied the temperature in the basement. The bird, however, made no effort to adapt to these modifications. It persisted in its enigmatic dance, seemingly under the control of an unseen force. The serum I used to first revive the bird was examined as the following step in our process. We found that the serum was a highly unstable material that disintegrated very quickly. My supply had entirely deteriorated and turned into a yellow acid, which I had been ignoring for the previous week. But let's put everything aside for the moment and concentrate on the subject. We focused on observing its peculiar motions. We took a frame-by-frame analysis of the video we recorded of the bird. Its wings and legs moved in an unsettling, repeated rhythm, as if it were caught in an unending loop. We decided to tranquilize the bird and then dissect it to precisely examine its internal organs in a frantic bid to learn more about this phenomena. We believed that this might offer hints as to the reason behind its state. The bird didn't respond when I shot it with my tranquilizer gun, though, and it kept dancing nonstop. Normal tiredness and tranquilizers both failed to halt it. For the time being, we'll keep watching to see if the bird finally falls over. If not, I'll have to obtain a gun because I won't be able to attack this creature with a knife, and I can't possibly continue to live with a dancing zombie bird in the basement. The past 3 days have been a true agony. April 7, 1986. No matter what we do, the bird never exhibits indications of weakness or tiredness. Its activities cannot be halted by either the ambient conditions we alter or tranquilizers. It appears to be propelled by an inexorable, invisible force. With each passing day that the bird is imprisoned in its repulsive dance, our frustration and terror increase. My nightmares are worse than ever, making the nights intolerable for me. I keep seeing the dancing bird in my head, and I'm wondering if there's a way to stop this torture. I've given gun ownership as a serious consideration, but I hold back. Even if it is imprisoned in this mysterious state, it feels immoral to kill a live being. But the longer this nightmare goes on, the more I begin to doubt that it is still a real thing and not only a horrifying caricature of life and death. I've come to the point where Dr. Smith and I feel helpless. Our investigation has merely dragged us further into this riddle rather than closer to a solution. Before this nightmare totally swallows us, we must decide. April 8, 1986. Today was the day that we finally overcame our reservations and took the picture. At least that was the initial goal, but this beast kept going even after being shot in the head. From the wounds, a viscous black liquid flowed. According to Dr. Smith and I, the creature appears to be inwardly decomposing while keeping its exterior shape. We set the thing on fire after dousing it in gasoline out of despair. This experiment should never have been initiated. The skeleton eventually fell to the ground and was reduced to nothing more than ashes. But I swear that even when there were only bones left, those ludicrous movements persisted for a few more seconds. I have no idea what exactly happened in this case, and I don't believe that science alone can account for it. But I feel I must carry on studying since I don't believe I'll ever be at peace with this otherwise. Dr. Smith concurred that we must proceed on April 9, 1986, and for the time being, he will stay in my guest room. I'd like to add that the gentleman from whom I purchased this home appears to be the author of these notes, brother. The seller had no further plans for this building. At least that is how the real estate agent described it to me. I should also mention that neither Dr. Stone, the author, nor Dr. Smith intended to leave this area. Although I've since disposed of the majority of their possessions, when I first arrived, the master bedroom and the guest room both appeared to have been quickly emptied of all except a few clothing items. Regarding the other oddities, it is true that there is a curious experimentation basement, but the room no longer has a metal door. It is now located in the garden, about 2 meters away from the house. However, there are still unmistakable indications that something on the floor had once been charred by a powerful fire. The table is still there. But unless the two of them were conducting research on a Dan albatross, it doesn't appear to have been made for the bird from the narrative. The previous laboratory, however, is largely gone, and it appears that all the records and research findings were destroyed prior to their departure. I am worried about everything, especially in light of the diary, and I will be staying in a hotel for the upcoming few days. I'm hoping I'll be able to sleep soundly once more, and that the contents of the diary are merely a tale designed to frighten potential residents. Dissociate Dr. Smith a call today and urge him to come see me. I'm not a big fan of people, and the majority of people don't like me either for a variety of personal reasons. I recently bought a new home that is so far away from other people that my closest neighbor is at least 1.5 miles away, which serves as a perfect example of how much I detest being around people. That's true. It's just me and the trees and animals in every direction. Now, many would consider me insane for residing in this manner so far from civilization. I'd be pretty much screwed if something terrible happened, I know. But right now in my life, I don't think I really give a damn about that. I guess I didn't think I did. Such a fool I am. When I eventually hauled my beaten-up truck and the few belongings I own up the twisting route to my new home, I had left the town where I had previously lived at around 7 in the morning. This driveway was approximately 1/3 of a mile long in all, full with so many pebbles and potholes I was convinced I'd get stuck, and it cut straight through the deep pine forest like a gigantic serpent of earth and gravel. But by some remarkable act of luck, I was able to escape needing to contact a towing service. Eventually, the foliage and trees gave way to show a clearing with a little cabin in the middle. A few birds fled from their close hiding places among the dense and knotted pine trees as I exited my pickup by slamming the door behind me. I circled the truck to the back, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, and started unloading. I have mentioned that I didn't own many things. That's accurate. Despite this, it still took me nearly 6 hours to unload everything. The hardest thing was the furniture. Dealing with the armchair nearly caused me to break my back. But as I've already mentioned, I'm not very good with company, including those who are helping me move. I let out a loud moan and stretched a little, wiping the perspiration from my brow as I turned to face the sinking sun. Deep in the woods, a loud cracking sound could be heard. It must have been incredibly loud because it was clearly audible even from a great distance away. I looked in the area it seemed to have originated from and thought to myself, damn serious tree branch right there. The forest was so deep that after around 50 feet, the light disappeared and was replaced by gnarled branches and darkness. It didn't help that the sun was setting, casting ominous shadows across the lawn and toward my house. Despite everything, I kept my sight fixed on the area. A deer, maybe a bear. I then understood why I had been holding my breath and let out a deep exhale. I heard it again as I turned to face the steps leading to my front porch. Another loud snap could be heard coming out of the woods. I spun around to face it, but once more there was nothing. I chuckled as I finally pulled my eyes away from the forest and entered the cabin, closing the elaborately carved wooden door behind me. Jumping at damn twigs now, I mused. Standing in the foyer, I smiled as I took in my new house. It was a pretty wonderful place, had a vintage rustic air to it that fit the traditional mountain home qualities I was looking for. Even some rather contemporary appliances had been added, and the exterior was equipped with lovely motion floodlights. And I paid nearly nothing for it all after all that heavy lifting. I must admit, I didn't feel like unpacking too much, so for the time being, the most of my belongings are still in this room, neatly stacked up against the wall. I took off my work boots and went into the kitchen to prepare my own meal. Well, having a few cups of ramen noodles and a beer for dinner. I groaned as I acknowledged that I would ultimately need to go into town for some groceries. In order to watch one of the several sleazy B movies I'd brought with me, I unpacked the TV and an old rocking chair and placed them in my new living room. I loved ridiculous, scary movies. I opened the window next to me to let in some of the cold air, and then I began eating my ramen. When I heard it, I almost felt like I should have jumped out of my clothing. Another branch in the woods snapped, but this one was different. Closer. Undoubtedly, it was closer. I sat back down in my chair, but I couldn't take my eyes off the forest. Why did this irritate me? Animals and sticks were everywhere in the awful woods. Hearing a couple snaps now, and then wasn't odd. I tried to convince myself how foolish I was acting, but I just stared out the window. Now that it was darker outside, my chances of seeing anything decreased even further. That's when I realized how peaceful it was, if you don't count the noisy fucking branches, that is. There is no bird call audible. I figured they could be sleeping. However, why weren't any crickets chirping? My head had begun to hurt, and despite the cool air coming in through the window, I was beginning to perspire. I grunted as I stood up from my chair and muttered out loud, "Okay, enough of that then." I then quickly closed and latched the window. I had begun to wish that I had brought traits. I assumed I wouldn't require any at this distance from others, but why now? I felt exposed, maybe even helpless. However, the old .22 rifle I had brought with me did offer some solace. I resumed eating my lunch, which had already started to cold, realizing that I had been gazing out the window for longer than I had anticipated. I cleaned up and went to my bedroom down the hall after some time had passed. About 10 o'clock had come, and a glance out the window revealed nothing but a sea of darkness. It was one of those evenings without a moon or stars that gave you the impression that you were in outer space. My headache had gotten rather bad by this point, and I felt like I would need my medication to help me sleep in any significant way. Yes, the medications are connected to my problems with other people. I downed a sleeping pill before climbing into the bed that was also included in this cottage. I was pleasantly surprised by how much more comfy the mattress was than I anticipated. It wouldn't take long for me to lapse into another of those protracted, dreamless slumbers I had grown accustomed to. Not too long. I rose and sat facing left and right. But I wasn't greeted by the welcoming walls of my bedroom. Nothing but the peaceful, dark trees spread in every direction. I wouldn't be able to see anything if it weren't for the lamp. From where does this lantern even originate? Snap. That blasted noise was back, stabbing through the nothingness like a knife. I was at a loss for what to do. I started to feel as though I was choking on cold water as panic started to seize my body. I had to leave this place. Kirakake. I had to get away. I screamed as I started my frantic rush across the trees. No, damn it, no. Branches pull at my clothing and flesh as they protrude from all sides like skinny clawed hands. But at the time, I knew I had to get out of there and couldn't even begin to care about how I was feeling physically. Another of those dreadful snapping noises came from behind me and got closer as it chased me. What even was outside? Oh no, what was that? I had so many scratches and scrapes that my head felt like it was going to burst. I nearly fall and crack my head open on a rock I didn't see, but I managed to catch myself in time. Kirakik. I noticed that the noises were getting louder and more frequent. It was approaching. I sobbed into the night as tears sting my eyes as I tried to escape the pointlessness of my predicament. But just as I gave up hope, I emerged from the forest and entered a well-known clearing. I shouted, "Yes, yes." I'd made it home, and now I simply had to go inside. My house is not what I see in the clearing. I can see a tree in the low light my candle casts, a really large tree. The trunk rises high into the sky, and its numerous leafless branches, like the arms of a massive insect that is trying to pull the moon from the sky with its twisted legs. I'm completely astounded by the sight and riveted by it. Snap! Only a few feet behind me, a terrible sound had brought my attention back to the present. But I am aware that running right now is useless. Like the tree in front of me, I am planted to the earth while I stand there. I was afraid that just looking at it would harm me, so I didn't want to see what it was. I won't go backwards. I just wished for it to end. I tightly closed my eyes and clenched my hands into fists as I awaited the intense anguish of an impending death. Later, I awoke. I opened my eyes, drenched in sweat, to see my room's ceiling. I croaked, "God damn," and nearly tossed the covers off of myself. I rolled out of bed and stumbled into the kitchen to get a glass of ice water for myself. My sore vocal cords felt incredible relief from it. Had I also been yelling while I slept? I thought as I ran my palm down my face that those medications were supposed to prevent that from happening. What made the dream seem so vivid? Its tree. I thought I had seen it before. After a few minutes of silent thought, it suddenly hit me. After more hesitation than necessary, I turned and went to the back door. The large backyard was bordered by trees on all sides, but the one that faced my house. The lawn had a few little trees here and there, but right in the middle of it was a huge tree stump. By my calculations, the object had to be at least 10 or 11 feet broad. This was seen in one of the images used to market the home on the website where I discovered it. Evidently, this is where the majority of the timber for my cabin came from. I crossed the lawn, allowing the cool morning air to calm my still incredibly warm body, stopping a little distance from the stump and gazing down at it. In comparison to the tree in my nightmare, this stump was unquestionably far more dead, but it seemed exactly the right width. It seemed normal with my luck to have such a god-awful dream on the first night in my dream home. I took one more look towards the woods in the very rear of my yard before turning and making my way back inside. After an unremarkable morning, I had concluded that perhaps I might just go into town for those groceries. It was now midday, and curtains, I sternly told myself. I was merely peering into the trees on either side of my path the entire way there, and when I rolled over a branch, the snapping noise it created nearly forced me to veer off the road. Those terrible woods. I took a breath in order to relax. "Just a dream. You'll adore this place," I remarked. The entire drive took around 40 minutes, although I could definitely speed it up after clearing away all those pebbles and patching the potholes. I entered the town, a small enclave of civilization, when I crossed from dirt and gravel to pavement. A modest shopping complex in the middle housed nearly all of the local businesses. I located a parking space and entered. I passed the lone employee working at the checkout area as I entered the grocery shop through its folding doors. Appeared to be an older woman, with her hair pulled back in an unkempt gray bun. She had thick glasses that gave off the appearance of an aging librarian. By God, I hoped she wasn't a chatterbox. I had gathered a respectable collection of stuff after spending roughly 20 minutes stumbling around on worn-out and discolored floor tile. I turned and began walking down the somewhat cramped aisle because I had decided it was time to check out when I suddenly came to a complete stop due to a snapping sound coming from behind. I hear myself coughing here. There's no way, just no way. I nearly broke my neck whipping my head around. But much to my great relief, all I see is another employee. He was severing plastic straps, holding a box closed with a box cutter. I continued to stare before an uncontrollable chuckle escaped, sending the man's expression into disbelief. I quickly turned around and went the remaining distance to the front after realizing that I probably looked nuts for doing so. I tried my best to grin back at the old woman working the checkout counter, but it just came off as awkward and strained as usual. She asks me, "Haven't seen your face before. New in town?" I sigh internally. Yes, that is the query. I made an effort to respond to her in the most upbeat manner I could. She nodded and kept going through my things. Yeah, but just moved in yesterday actually. I wanted her to scan them more quickly. She continued to speak. I blink a few times. I can always tell I got an eye for faces. Whereabouts are you located anyway? I previously said, moved into a place up the dirt road, the new cabin. My brain is capable of this. How come I said all that? One may have simply invented something. She's just a regular elderly lady, I suppose, I thought. When I noticed she had fixed me with a peculiar expression and that her previous demeanor had vanished, I immediately stopped what I was thinking. Then, without saying a word, she handed me my final bag, which I confusedly took. Had I somehow offended her? Typical. The trip home was silent until I managed an awkward half-laugh and decided to go with a brief goodbye. I quickly threw curtains over all the windows as soon as I got home. I made an effort to convince myself that it was only for my own privacy, but it was at best a flimsy justification. I didn't start making dinner until I had totally blocked my view of the forest. I turned up some music, singing along at times, to drown out any other possible outside noises. Later, when more time had gone, it was 8 p.m. The sun had already started to set. In my living room, I could barely make out a tiny bit of light peeking through the curtains. I sighed and plopped down in my freshly unpacked armchair to watch some of that mind-numbing television. I must have taken an unintentional slumber at some point because the next thing I know, I was being startled awake once more by. Well, I'd so handily decided, judging by the TV I'd left on. I noticed it was 12 a.m. by looking at my watch. I had wrecked my sleep routine by taking a 4-hour snooze. Oh well. I groaned as I got up from my chair and stumbled into my room down the dim corridor. After last night, I reasoned that I should try 2 pills this time rather than just 1. I'll definitely pass out in this manner. In order to see my now curtailed window through the dismal darkness of my room, I had taken both, getting into bed and lying onto my side. After 20 minutes, I can definitely feel the medication working. My head was starting to feel fuzzy, and I was feeling my bloodshot, sagging eyes widen. I am fixated on the window. I had a strong sense that it was in my yard. I struggled internally to get out of bed and move toward the curtains. I have to be aware. If I knew, I wouldn't be so scared. It's only a wild animal, for crying out loud, a mere animal. I mutter as I nudge the curtain aside just enough to get a glimpse through. Just an animal. It was pitch black outside. It was so dark that only hazy shapes could be seen in the weak moonlight. I had to search for it for a while before I found it. A recognizable shape stood in the clearing's middle. A deer. No, somewhat too large. The only thing I could make out was a dark blob that resembled an elk, which led me to believe it was an elk. I could clearly out its large set of branching antlers that grew on top of its head and its tall, lanky legs. I smiled to myself for being such a baby over all of this as I sighed in relief. When another snap from outside led me to glance around in disbelief, I had already started to look away. To produce such noises, what was it stepping on? My yard was rather well cleared this morning. I kept watching it out of curiosity, but I could feel those drugs starting to work more and more on me. It eventually hit me after I had been staring at it for almost a minute. I don't think I had motion lights. Why didn't they turn on? Actually, since I started seeing it, had it moved at all? I tried to swallow, but I had a dry throat. I persisted in watching it while another minute, then 2, passed. I begged desperately, just fuck move, please. But all it does is stand there in the shadows like a phony statue. Why the hell wasn't it moving? Everything about this was wrong. I came to the conclusion. A quiet creaking sound emanating from the elk draws my attention. That which, it intensified up until, antlers, my God, it's antlers. They wiggled, then snapped and moved like the tree limbs that resembled insects in my dreams, like someone breaking an arm at various angles, like more cracks and shifting of the antlers can be heard. I hurriedly closed the curtains to block it out, but I can still clearly remember it. My room was completely dark. It couldn't have seen me and didn't see me. I prayed to God not to let it have seen me. I simply find myself shivering and panting while I wait for something to happen while sitting on the floor next to the window. But even as this new horror surged through me, I could feel the drugs struggle to knock me out. I started keeping track of the passing minutes while gazing up at the clock on my nightstand. 12:30 a.m., 12:45 a.m., 12:50 a.m. Around this time, I eventually feel asleep, but the next morning I awake screaming from the same dreadful dream. I was relieved to notice that light was coming in through the drapes from my very uncomfortable floor position. I threw them open after waking up stiff from my bad sleeping position to discover an empty backyard with that enormous stump in the middle. Wasn't that thing perched on that stump? I insisted that it wasn't, obstinately. Nothing could be found there. And that's all. All of this was a delusion brought on by sleeping pills. I tell myself that everything has just been in my head, as it always has been. How foolish I was. I only walked outside once, to retrieve the mail at the end of my driveway. No matter how hard I try to convince myself it didn't happen. Otherwise, the music was blaring while I was locked inside my cabin. I was a big fan of this music. I pulled out some novels I hadn't opened since purchasing them, and I started watching a movie only to realize midway through that I had already seen it the day I had moved in. Something kept getting in the way. The idea of what I observed outside my window. I instantly reminded myself, though, that it was impossible. This was the truth. No nightmare, please. Bears were the worst creatures in these forests. Yet even then, they won't intentionally try to kill you. I made vain attempts to reassure myself, and as the hours passed, I could feel my worry rising. I made the decision to take a shower at 6 o'clock and spent about an hour in there. I know it will increase my water bill, but I really needed it. In fact, I did feel a little bit better afterward. I changed and slid into bed, sitting there in silence. I reasoned that I would skip the sleeping pills in order to prove to myself that everything I was experiencing was merely a result of some defective medications, and that I would eventually receive a sizable settlement or other form of restitution. Yes, they were meant to prevent me from having spooky dreams, but the last two were the worst I'd ever had, and I didn't want to go through that ordeal again. I kept my eyes glued to the clock, counting down the minutes as I was mentally on high alert for anything that was definitely not genuine. I, however, heard nothing. Only the common cricket noises in the forest. For better or worse, I let sleep grab me as I went deeper under the covers. Why didn't I simply swallow the dreadful pills? Rapid, thudding footsteps coming down my hallway roused me from sleep. Here in my fucking house it was. How? As I stumbled toward the side of my bed and the wall that had my .22 mounted on it, I simply kept thinking, how? But it was too late. My door flung wide. But it wasn't what was outside my window that entered. A man wearing dark clothing was there. Yes, there had been a break-in. He aimed a gun at me, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I winced at the volume as he roared at me, "Don't you fucking move." I complied, standing still. I started to say, Look, I don't have much to steal, but was interrupted by the intruder's subsequent scream. He held out the handgun, signaling to me, "Shut the fuck up or I'll blow your brains out." See mirror. I resisted his instruction to follow him to the open door. Why did I have such bad luck? I overcome these nightmares only to be met with a circumstance this genuine. He had dragged me down the hall and out of the room before him. He commanded me to stand right fuck there. So I did. I remained motionless for about 15 seconds. This was what? Was he deliberating over how to handle me? That was responded by a solid shot from his rifle to the back of my head. I stumbled to the ground and again struck my head on the chilly floor. The world suddenly began to spin. He walked around my crushed form and said, "Had my eyes on this place for a few days. You should really start locking your doors." Damn it, I'd been so disorganized yesterday I neglected even that much. The goddamn idiot had also really teased me about it. Why didn't he just steal all of my crap and leave it at that? I believe he was ready to strike me again when it happened. Kiraikiki. That sound arrived abruptly and loudly. Even though I was groggy, I could feel my fear rising. It seemed real because my attacker appeared to have heard it as well. The truth had always existed. I shook my head as best I could, but another snap from outside caught his attention once more. "What was that?" he said aloud, staring down at me. "You got someone living here with you, huh?" I shook my head in response. He spat at me. "Yeah, you do. Fucking liar." He bellowed loudly as he stormed out the back door and into the night, wood squeaking under his sneakers as he marched aggressively down the hallway. The motion sensor lights snap on as intended. "Hey, don't move or I'll shoot your." Of course, they hadn't been improperly placed or defective. The only thing that was wrong about this circumstance was that thing outside. I could no longer see the man from where I was lying on the ground. Just the radiance those powerful lights outside put into the space. The man's voice reflected his utter bewilderment and total lack of comprehension at what he undoubtedly observed standing in the midst of my yard. He had said, "What the fuck? SNAP." The screaming then started. Leading in horror. Undiluted, pure horror. He was shouting like that the entire time he was running back to the house. It irritated me that someone outside seemed pleased to see that sad man because of the snapping and cracking. I had in mind at the moment a shark tasting blood. His screams almost immediately changed to cries of pain, and he started pleading for his life. Outside, it seemed as though he were being violently tossed around by a powerful force, since the sound of his voice was moving around everywhere quickly. I finally managed to stand up after a great deal of effort. I had to battle against every instinct that was screaming me to run away right then. And then as I stooped down toward the open back door, I covered my eyes as I got to the door. I was against seeing it. A few warm droplets rained across my face just before I slammed the door shut, locking it, though I believed I did before. Now I knew without a doubt in my mind that I simply must know to see ITCRACKIN. As if someone had bent a group of twigs until each one snapped in the middle. I whirled around and hurried frantically to my front door, which is likely where the would-be robber had entered. This suspicion was confirmed when I discovered it to be unlocked, so I immediately shut that door as well. I turned back to my rear door and saw that the yelling from outside was still going on. It has only gotten worse. I heard hazy words and sentences. His pleas had turned into something that almost sounded insane. He often expressed regret to his mother, his father, and other people I can only presume he knew. At one point, his screams were followed by moments of horrifying laughing before switching back to screaming. Even though his vocal cords were being torn apart and blood was filling his lungs, he continued to scream. Why was he still alive? How did he survive? Even though this man had just battered me over the head and attempted to rob me, I felt nothing except deep compassion for him. Like someone breaking every bone in their body, snapping. What words would best convey the sounds he made? Maybe, similar to a man who died slowly after being sucked into a woodchopper feet first. For an hour and a half, the man outside my house yelled in this way. I can say this with absolute certainty, since all I could do the entire time was stare across the room at the wall clock. What else was there for me to do but sit and listen? What I believed to be the man's bones breaking and the monster outside making snapping noises mixed together. Finally, Thankfully, the screams eventually stopped and were replaced by a sad gurgling wail and silence. I sat still, making no attempt to get up, not even to get up and tend to the wound in my skull. I waited until the sun had already risen before getting up, and when I did, my body felt like it was made of jelly. I headed for the restroom while glancing in the mirror. It was made out to be dried up blood specks that had previously felt like warm rain on my face when I had been at the door earlier. I quickly cleaned it all off in the sink, fled the room, and then turned to peek at the back door. I had the impression of being on the moon while walking there. Everything moved slowly. There was no way this was true, I thought mindlessly. It felt like 1,000,000 years had passed before I finally pushed it open. Reality had existed. It had all, of course, been true. I will never forget what I witnessed. No amount of drugs will make that scene less intense. The doot was scattered all over my yard. Yes, that was definitely him, everywhere. Looking to the side of my house revealed that it was painted a similar color to the grass, which was stained crimson. Meat, organs, and broken bones stabbed vertically into the ground were all over the place. But the bones were so pure and white. My lips and nose were covered with warm vomit and snot, which made it difficult for me to breathe as I sputtered as I knelt down and puked up the leftovers from yesterday night's dinner. In the midst of this mayhem, I raised my head once more and saw something else. The tree stump had transformed back into a tree. It came back to life. It was much smaller than the one in my visions, but it was still unmistakably a tree. The man's intestines were strung from branch to branch like squishy power lines in that tree's gnarled limbs. His skin was spread out across the wide, dark trunk's front, which was facing my house. I could virtually see the frozen misery on its stretched face since it had been so deftly ripped from his body. It's almost nighttime again, and the day passed by quickly. I'm at a loss on what to do. I'm not allowed to report this to the police. How do I respond? That someone entered my home unlawfully and then what? They dismantled themselves with care and displayed their component pieces in my backyard. I imagine that people get executed for doing something like this. I don't have the best track record to begin with. It was best, I determined, to just clean it up, keep it all hidden, and act like it never happened. It's challenging to remove many meters worth of guts from a tree when you have to stop every 5 minutes to throw up. Moreover, I'll require a power washer for my walls. However, as I was removing that jerk off my yard, I had another thought, which only became apparent when I heard the progressively close breaking of branches in the nearby woods a short while ago. It doesn't seem like that tree has reached its full height yet.